I tested my favorite Nikon lenses against Fuji's latest primes to see if the brand I used to love is still behind. Fuji updated their cameras, sensors, almost the entire X-mount lineup, and after comparing 10 lenses side by side on the Zf XT5, I found 3 strange differences. But a camera doesn't define you. It's okay to move on if you want to. Hello, I'm Jack, this is Bokeh Therapy, and today I'm obsessing over these 2 systems so you don't have to. I need to know, once and for all, how good Fuji's crop sensor 2nd gen primes really are. About the same size as Nikon's 1st gen full frame S-line, but up to double the price. There are no sponsors for this video. I had to pay for all the gear myself, except one mystery lens that fills a gap in Nikon's Z lineup. It's on loan from Mainline Photo. Nikon versus Fuji, the 5 most common focal lengths, starting with 35mm equivalent lenses. There's tons of options for both Fuji and Nikon. The 2 I find most interesting are the premium 35mm lenses. Do you need to switch from Fuji for full frame if you like a fast, compact 35? A 35mm equivalent makes you work a bit harder than you'd like, but there's a reason Fuji make so many. Street photography is embedded into the brand's DNA, and a 35 or 23mm on Fuji is perfect for a modern urban scene like this. Glass doors, reflections, signs, that constant flow of commuters filling the frame on either side. As soon as any figure or shape is distorted, it takes you out of the reality of that moment, and for 35mm, lens designers don't have to work as hard to get rid of the distortion in the corners. The scene speaks for itself, just like the image quality from Fuji's most premium 35mm equivalent, the 23mm 1.4 LMRWR. More than resolves the XT5's 40 megapixel sensor, sharp and contrasty, but you can see the ZF's 24 megapixel sensor with a mystery 35mm looks just as crisp. Couldn't I go with a slower 35 if I was concerned with size? This field of view is neutral. It can benefit from more visual tricks when layering the foreground, the leading lines into the alleyway. Separation that comes with a fast 35 has more flavor if you want it. There is more separation on the full frame ZF than the XT5, but did I use the Nikon 35 1.8S or the Voigtlander 35 f2 Apo? It's really hard to make a fast, compact 35mm equivalent lens for any system. The optics make it so that it's just on the verge of wide angle, so you have to correct for distortion, you need more glass. It's not like a 40 or 50 where you can make it smaller. In even lighting, these 2 scenes looks almost identical in detail, which brings me to the first subtle difference, metering. Both cameras are set to multi or matrix metering, aperture priority, exposure compensation 0, shot in RAW, edit with the exact same Lightroom settings, and you can see the Fuji images just seem brighter. Not uniformly, the shadows seem to be lifted by half a stop. I'm not messing with any of the dynamic range settings that's set to default. I don't know why it's tuned this way by Fuji. Every photo in this video was shot in RAW and edited using my free Chrome emulation Lightroom preset straight in your inbox this week via the Bokeh Therapy newsletter. My personal high ISO threshold on Fuji is 12,800. For the ZF, it's 32,000. But with a fast f1.4 lens and IBIS, there's never a need to go that high. Low light's not the reason to switch. Fuji have done a great job with their new 23mm 1.4, much better corrected than my old 23mm 1.4, even though the amount of separation is still less than a 35 full frame I'm using on the ZF. Less isolation isn't a problem for me, but if you take more portraits, you might prefer a full frame look. Where you'll see the biggest performance gap though is in this next frame. Backlit leaves, sunlight, there's less purple fringing in the blown out highlights on Fuji, than on the Nikon. And by now you should have figured out which Nikon 35 I'm using. This amount of fringing on the Nikon isn't terrible, but it is the most pronounced out of any Nikon S lens, which means it's the Nikon 35 1.8S, not the Voigtlander 35 Apo, which is better corrected at the cost of being manual focus only. Nikon has their 35 1.2 S line lens, which is absolutely massive. They have their 1.4, which is about the same size as the 1.8, but it is less well corrected in my testing. And for Fuji, there are so many 23mm equivalent lenses, but this one is their premium flagship option. What's interesting is that the two lenses are pretty close in size. So often this is the lens people pick up and say, well, why do I bother staying with APS-C? Why don't I just go full frame? The Fuji's CA control is impressive, but apart from these minor aberrations, the difference between Fuji and Nikon in this premium 35mm category, it comes down to handling. There's an aperture ring on the Fuji all metal build versus mostly metal build and no aperture ring, while being a little heavier on the Nikon to go with an overall heavier full frame package. What Fuji got right is their f2 Fujiground lineup. Of late they chose to go big with these newer 1.4s. Nikon should go small. They already have enough big halo glass. Time for a tight f2 full frame lineup, just like the next focal length. 40mm is the new one and done focal length for a lot of photographers, as you can see by all the lines and geometry in this train station walkway. Like 35mm, 40 is still neutral, not a statement lens filled with exaggerated visual signature, which is also seen in this abandoned scooter. All the lines in this tunnel converge towards it, and not only is there no distortion, 40mm makes it feel more natural than 35. Closer to the action, right there in the moment, a bit more intimate, and due to the optical design of 40mm, it can be a much more compact lens as well. There's two first-party 40mm lenses on Nikon, Nikon's 40mm f2 and the Voigtlander 40mm 1.2. It's one of those I'm using. Both quite small and compact as far as full frame lenses go, but to further level the playing field in this comparison, I stopped the full frame 40mm down to f4. This theoretically matches the 2.8 maximum aperture on the APS-C Fuji 27mm, sharpness on the Fuji 27mm is impressive, about as good as this full frame 40mm stop down in the center. It is on Fuji's list of lenses that can fully resolve the 40 megapixel sensor. For aberrations, the full frame 40 looks better. It's not fair it is stopped down versus wide open on the Fuji, but flow resistance is good on both. Voigtlander may have paid the Z-mount licensing fee, but this doesn't necessarily include Nikon's lens coatings. But these lens coatings aren't on Nikon's 40mm lens either, so which 40 is it? The Voigtlander 40 1.2 is rather famous for its jagged edge bokeh when stopped down. Its aperture blades are straight, whereas Nikon's 40mm uses rounded aperture blades. So based on these rounder looking bokeh balls, I'm using Nikon's 40mm f2, which approaches peak sharpness at f4 and as sharp as the Fuji 27mm in the center. Corners aren't fantastic on either lens, but it's no matter. It's cheap and small. The Fuji 27mm has an aperture ring, metal mount. The Nikon 40 is plastic mount, even though it is weather resistant. The XT5 is the 5th generation of the XT line, so they've really figured out the ergonomics. The front grip is just big enough. There's a back grip, and it is very ergonomic even with their heavier 1.4 linear motor line of lenses. The second subtle difference is not the ergonomics. Fuji has had more time to take customer feedback, but that's why the haptics on the XT5 surprised me. The lockable dials, when unlocked, easy to bump, less clicky, positions feel less precise than on the ZF. That exposure comp dial, it's not lockable on either camera, but it's super easy to bump on the XT5, whereas it's less so on the ZF. The switches that sit under those dials are also easy to bump on both cameras, looser on the XT5. And it's this switch, a still to movie switch that's caused a lot of ongoing issues for Fuji. By making their flagship, the XH line, Fuji diverted resources away to make the price of the lower tier XT5 make sense. For me, 2 months in, my copy's fine, but it doesn't inspire as much confidence as a ZF. Other than the slightly annoying flip screen, the ZF feels like an all-in photo first product, so satisfying and fun to use. But then comes the ZR, Nikon's attempt at that photo to video switch where they get it right. I love telephoto lenses to change the look of everyday scenes into something more mysterious. But the idea of peeking into a train carriage, speeding away at night is counterintuitive. An 85 or 90 gives you that voyeuristic ability. I get it's not everyone's cup of tea, which is also the case of Fuji's 56mm 1.2. Its autofocus quirks are enough to scare many away from its amazing image quality. Nikon's 85 1.8S is less controversial. It's a longer, tighter version of their amazing 50 1.8S, we'll talk about that next. Super sharp, well controlled for aberrations, matches the other 1.8S primes. If you want even sharper, there's the Voigtlander 90mm f2 Oppo. It's only an M mount so far. I adapted using the TT Artisan 6-bit adapter, focal length selector on the side to get the EXIF data and IBIS right. Can you guess which telephoto I'm using on the ZF? The amount of detail in both these scenes is great. Both lenses are super sharp. But what most people look for in a telephoto is what's out of focus. The bokeh on both cat's eye towards the corners. Neither Fuji or the Nikon have flat field curvature. Fuji's 56mm is famous for its closer minimum focusing distance, closer than both the Nikon 85 or the Voigtlander 90mm Oppo. There's a nice gentle glow on these lamps. For the Fuji 56mm, you don't lose contrast, but there is less detail amidst the glow. Whereas the Nikon telephoto I'm using, it could be either the 85 or the Voigtlander 90mm Oppo, dampens the flare significantly. And that's how you know this is the Nikon 85. The one area does better than the Voigtlander 90mm Oppo optically. Nikon's coatings are really the best in the industry out of any lens I've tested. Both of these telephotos are great. 56mm 1.2 on APS-C matches the depth of field of 85 1.8 on full frame. And if you're in the Fuji system and know how to work with its autofocus quirks, this 56mm is worth your time. But for performance, this Nikon 85 has never let me down. Doing these insane camera tests is actually what's kept me sane this year. Everything else, chaos. But one camera stayed the same. It is the one I reach for on instinct, but a security blanket shouldn't define me. Why are these linear motor Fuji lenses so big? For the normal, standard focal lengths, say a 28, 35 and a 50mm field of view, the crop sensor makes it so that these lenses need to be a bit wider. 18mm for 28, 23 for a 35 and 33, 35 for a 50. And it's just harder to make lenses that are wider yet still have the right amount of glass to correct for distortion. It is about 2/3 of the size of the equivalent Nikon lenses. It is not a small ask. 50mm is still plenty wide for everything other than tight group shots. You can crop a 50mm image to pull off a tighter look. Due to a 50's proportions and fall off, it can act like a longer focal length in a pinch. If it wasn't so versatile, why would Fuji make so many 50mm equivalents? The one I'm testing is the most premium, the Fuji 33mm 1.4. How does this stack up against Nikon's options? Their 50 1.8S is optically the best in the S lineup, perhaps only bested by Voigtlander's 50mm f2 Apo. Which Nikon 50 did I use? I love 50 more than wider focal lengths for reflections. By the time the light bounces from the glass into the lens, a 50 closes the distance better. Still enough room to layer the umbrella, silhouettes, shadows in this scene. It's why I love 50. Along with how much you can fit into the frame with a 50, you can also use it to isolate a subject like these flowers overhead. The Fuji 33mm looks fantastic. The isolation and separation looks very comparable to the 50 on the ZF. Even though both the 1.8S and the f2 Apo from Voigtlander are slower, they both have close to flat field curvature, where the bokeh looks more even across the frame. What about CA and aberrations? Both of these 50 equivalents look fantastic, minimal, well controlled, and when it comes to flare resistance, the Nikon 50 1.8S performs amazingly well, just like the Voigtlander 50 Apo. You can't tell which 50 it is based on the flare results here. The Fuji 33mm in terms of flare is actually the best out of any Fuji lens I've tested, even though there's a bit more ghosting than the Nikon. Fuji's 33mm 1.4 is well corrected as well, but there is a hint of that glow in terms of how it renders highlights, how it renders reflections and glare. There's a hint of that old school magic, even though it is sharper and very well corrected for aberrations. It's a very impressive lens, beautiful fall off, clearly next gen compared to the old XF35 1.4, but size isn't that much smaller than Nikon's 1.8S while being double the price. Before revealing which 50 I'm using on the ZF, are the Voigtlander Apos worth it? The Nikon 1.8S lineup is so close to apochromatic, the optical performance already pretty close to perfect, they have autofocus too. It's a little harder to justify the manual focus Apos at the 50mm focal length. It makes sense for 35mm, a cleaner look on the 35 f2 Apo versus the Nikon 35. It makes even more sense for 28mm. The 28 that I'm testing for Fuji is the 18mm f1.4. It's a fast 28 equivalent. Why would you even need a fast 28? Why can't you go for the 28 f2.8 from Nikon Z? Not for during the day shooting like this. Tend to stop down or zone focus if you're shooting with a manual 28. The reason you need a fast 28 is for at night. Of course, there's the Nikon 28 2.8Z, compact, modern performance, or I could be using Voigtlander's 28mm f2 Apo in that mount. Fuji has a 18mm f1.4, which I think is the best Fuji lens I've ever tested. A 28mm field of view is all about layering. Blue swirls, blue lights, commuters, they all line up and fit into this layered frame. There's not much depth of field difference though, so does that tip off which 28 I'm using on the ZF? Separation isn't the main thing I'm concerned with when it comes to 28mm though. Neither lens has the best bokeh, although you can get some in a pinch. It's not sharpness either, it does help when fitting more visual elements in at minimum focus distance. I can get closer on the Fuji 18mm than the 28mm I'm using on the ZF, but both look crisp. My main concern with 28mm isn't aberrations either, CA, fringing. I actually think a fast, wide vintage look is beautiful at 28mm. Rather than render modern scenes too accurately, aberrations give the wider field of view more texture. It's less smartphone looking. But both of these 28mm equivalents are well controlled, flare dampened to a similar extent. Fuji 18mm has some fringing in this extreme torture test. The Nikon 28 is doing some kind of voodoo magic. My actual main concern with 28mm is distortion, how warped the lines look near the edges. In this next frame on the alleyway, the this way sign looks sharp on both the XT5 and Zf. The edges look straight, details of the alleyway look crisp. So which 28mm did I use on the Zf? The telltale sign was back with this Santa shot. 28 2.8 can get almost as close as the Fuji 18mm 1.4, whereas the Voigtlander 28mm Aperture I used is a Leica M lens. Its minimum focus distance is limited to 0.5 meters. The Voigtlander 28 Aperture is a fantastic option adaptable to any camera. A native Z-mount version was just announced too, which means the 50 I was using earlier is the Nikon 1.8S. Looking back across all these lenses, I think Fuji have done an incredible job. The newer line of premium primes every bit as good as Nikon's full frame options, with two caveats. One, Nikon's S primes are more resistant to flare across the board, and two is the price. Prime for prime, a Fuji kit is significantly more expensive than Nikon, and it isn't that much smaller and lighter either. Better low light and build quality on the Zf may offset the extra weight compared to Fuji, as does the last subtle difference. The XT5 is a little sluggish in operation compared to the Zf. It's not slow, but start up, turn off, preview images. The Zf uses a non-stacked slow readout sensor, but I'm remaining impressed by the XP7 processor. The XT5 very sluggish startup time. Checking the images strangely slow as well, not just compared to the Zf, but the older XT3. That 40 megapixel sensor just doesn't seem to be a good match for the XT5's processor, which may be the root cause of all those persistent autofocus problems. The camera is a little slower in handling, each interaction feels a little less robust, and this is where you might start to lose trust. Not in the camera, but more so the brand. More megapixels might be easier to sell, but I would have preferred speed or better low light on the XT5. I think it is overblown how bad the autofocus in the XT5 is. The initial acquisition of autofocus is a little slower, but once it locks on, it's pretty sticky. You know what you're getting with Fuji. It's nothing crazy, nothing amazing. I wouldn't necessarily use the XT line for sports shooting, but it's good enough for everyday shooting for most of us. But these newer Fuji primes are amazing if you can stomach the price. Enough reason to overlook the XT5's shortcomings. And it seems like Fuji and Nikon are alternating between very clinical next level performance to resolve high-res sensors and a more flawed optic that's got a bit more character. For my channel, it makes sense to have both to cover new lenses on both mounts, but if I could only pick one. The Zf isn't perfect, but it got so many little details right as a photo-first device. I can't help but want to keep using it. It makes me trust Nikon to not let the ZR compromise their photo-first lineup. Even the ZR is more photo-centric than it needs to be. I covered the ZR in this video here through all the chaos this year, all the changes yet to come. The Zf will be my photo companion through it all. I'm Jack. This is Bokeh Therapy.